Welcome back, Bruins. My name is Angela Scales, and I serve as a Senior Director of Bruin Connections here at UCLA. Thank you for joining us tonight for our 8th episode in our YouTube live series, Bruin Career Insights. This evening, we'll be exploring how to find the right fit in your job search, and more specifically, how to break into advertising and marketing. By now, hopefully you've heard about UCLA One, a great resource if you're looking to connect with other Bruins and take the next step in your career. You can also check out the job postings, join professional groups for networking, and share your knowledge with fellow Bruins. It's easy. It's just uclaone.com. We want to be able to customize these events towards your interests. So to do that, we need your feedback and suggestions for upcoming topics. Send them our way at careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu. Also, a quick thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible. It's through your generous contributions and continued support that we're able to provide career resources for all Bruins. If you're thinking about upgrading your membership, you'll see a link in the live chat. Our special guest tonight is Natalie Kim. Natalie graduated from UCLA in 2008 with a degree in communication studies and a minor in French. She is the founder of We Are Next, a resource that helps students and young talent begin their advertising and marketing careers with confidence. She spent 10 years in advertising, most recently as the Director of Strategy at Firstborn in New York City. She's worked with a lot of recognizable brands such as L'Oreal, HBO, Coca-Cola, and Bacardi. And on top of that, she was recently recognized on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for marketing and advertising. And she was awarded the GenNext Award by She Runs It for young women who are already making their mark in the industry. Even though tonight isn't an in-person event, we're hoping it's still a highly interactive one. You can ask direct questions to Natalie by using the live chat function, so don't be shy. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. So now let's get started. Natalie, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be part of this series, having watched some of the episodes in the past, so I'm thrilled to be here. So I came to UCLA knowing that I wanted to do advertising. I had this kind of eureka moment in the south of France. So I studied abroad my freshman year in high school, actually. I did an exchange program, and I was so homesick the first couple weeks. It was really the first time I had been outside of the country and alone by myself, and so I wasn't taking it super well. And one of the few things that really comforted me was seeing commercials from brands that I recognized, like Coca-Cola. And even though I didn't understand everything that they were saying, I understood the emotion they were trying to elicit from me and what they were trying to get me to do through the ad. And I think in that moment, it really struck me how much advertising can transcend those kind of cultural and geographic boundaries. But I came into UCLA actually a comparative literature major, something I studied in high school that I was really interested in, but it only took one communication study, intro course, to get me to change my mind and immediately switch to comm studies. And I think having gone through that program and worked in the industry, it really did give me a great foundation for the way that I approach problems. Doing a social science major like that, you just touch so many different things that do affect the advertising and marketing industry, like psychology, sociology, those kind of things. And so even though it's not maybe like a trade school major, you don't take any advertising classes in comm studies, it still kind of gave me the grounding that I needed to, get a job and have a career in marketing and advertising. Apologize for the motorcycle. Anyways, I started my career, my advertising career in account management, actually, at a really small agency here in Los Angeles after I graduated school. But I quickly realized that strategy was really where my heart lay and what really got me excited about advertising overall. So I was able to make a switch and was in strategy for the good part of my career. And I worked in both LA and New York City, most recently as Director of Strategy at Firstborn, which you mentioned. It's an incredible agency. And in that role, I really discovered a love of mentorship that I didn't even really know was inside me, which eventually led me to start We Are Next when right around the time we moved back to LA at the end of last year. So that's kind of where I am today, kind of dedicating myself fully to GenNext, but still super connected to the industry through the work that we do, which I know we'll talk about.
So for those who might not be as familiar with the industry, when you said strategy, what does that specifically mean in terms of maybe the different parts within an agency?
Sure. So strategy involves an understanding of a few things. Certainly the brand that you're working on, kind of inside and out, what's the business problem you're trying to solve? What is the brand's position within the category, within their industry? It involves a deep look at people, which is something that I love about strategy. So your target consumer, who are they? What really motivates them? What are their hopes and fears and dreams? There's a lot of things we look into. And then also culture at large. You know, what is the context in which our work is going to go out into the world? And strategy, you look at these things and you do research around these things, both qualitative and quantitative, different methodologies. And you're trying to find kind of a truth about each, and that's sort of your sweet spot that grounds the creative idea that the creatives come up with and that we collaborate with the creatives to come up with. So it's really kind of that jumping board, springboard for great ideas. And I think it allows us to tie in kind of that business sense to it. So it's not just, you know, advertising without strategy is like art, right? It looks beautiful and makes us feel something emotional maybe, but you know, in advertising, we're really trying to accomplish business goals for brands, whatever that may be. So strategy is really what kind of ties those two together. So it's sort of a nice right brain, left brain combo.
That's great. So when you first graduated and you first went into the industry, what did you notice? You know, was it anything like Mad Men?
Yeah, it's interesting. There were definitely things that are accurately reflected by the show in my experience. Some of the things were like the energy and kind of pressure around new business pitches is something that definitely held true. There were a lot of really late nights and working weekends when you're on a new business pitch and you're trying to do everything to kind of win this account. And that I think we saw a lot of in the show. I think also the politics, both between clients and agencies and internally at agencies, especially around kind of that merger story arc in Mad Men. There's a lot of that, even at, you know, very small agencies and certainly at the larger agencies, which are dealing with mergers and acquisitions all the time. And lastly, the sense that the advertising that we see sometimes is really kind of the whim of a well-respected creative director like Don Draper. You know, of course, with the rise of strategy as a discipline and also more recently data strategy, these both play like a much larger role in advertising. And again, it's, I think, hopefully grounded in more substance, but I think you still get creative directors who come in and kind of change everything at the last minute because of a gut feeling. And I think, again, that's something we saw all the time at Mad Men, and I think does happen in the industry.
I can see how that would be challenging. So were you ever assigned a project where you were maybe, you know, working with a brand that you didn't believe in, and how did you handle that relationship?
I've been fortunate enough to never have been assigned a brand that I opposed to from like a moral, ethical standpoint. But there have certainly been clients whose products that I don't use personally, or whose industry I didn't have that much of an interest in, at least at the start. And I think in order for us to do our jobs well, you have to find something in the project to care about. So if it's not the brand or the product itself, you know, it could be that you're helping a business solve some problem, or, you know, trying to change something about an industry that's very stagnant. Some of the unsexiest verticals like financial institutions or healthcare and stuff like that are really ripe for that kind of disruptive thinking that I think advertising and marketing can bring. And then, you know, other things like finding, you can care about, you know, improving the lives of the target audience in some way, whether it's through the product or, you know, the way that the role that the brand plays in their life. So, you know, and I think if you put in the work to become a subject matter expert on an industry or brand that doesn't seem super sexy or interesting to you, you know, I'd be surprised to find things that you didn't even know were interesting to you. So if you can find something that you can believe in outside of the brand, then I think the relationship then sort of falls into place and everything works out.
So as a fellow comm major who thought that she wanted to go into advertising when I was a student at UCLA, what would you say are some of the most common misconceptions about marketing and advertising, and maybe what perpetuates those misconceptions?
Mm-hmm. One that came to mind, and it's not probably the most I don't know if it's the most common misconception, but I think it's one that's really interesting and very personal to me, is the misconception that everyone who works in advertising marketing is an extrovert, that you need to be this like big, loud, gregarious personality to really succeed and get ahead. And I can tell you, as someone who is very naturally more reserved and definitely feel drained after social situations, and I've spoken with so many other people through the work we do with We Are Next and the podcast, you can definitely be an introvert and still succeed in the industry. I know you have a whole episode about introversion as an entrepreneur. I think the same holds true. You know, there are always going to be louder voices in the room, but we can find our own strength and our own voice and our way to go about it. That isn't us trying to fit the mold of what we think is someone who works in advertising, but you can, just bring kind of your unique sensibility to it. There's been a lot more written about introversion in general, which has helped kind of, I think, correct this misconception. Yeah, that was the major one, like that definitely came to mind.
Yeah, well, and something I've heard too, and I didn't know if you wanted to comment on it, within the industry, in terms of the West Coast, LA versus New York, are there any differences in the industry in terms of location or where someone should go if they're really serious about breaking in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are definitely differences and nuances, and it's sort of fun to see the differences and how they map out. Certainly in the major markets, the major media markets that you think of, which would be New York, LA, San Francisco, those cities, you'll certainly find a huge concentration of agencies, just because the media and marketing is so huge. The consumers are there basically, and so you have a lot of shops. New York probably has the highest density, I think, of agencies in terms of kind of a capital for advertising for the States. I think it's still New York. Los Angeles, I think you have an amazing suite of agencies here. There's a lot of production that happens in LA, given its close ties to the entertainment industry. So you get a lot of, less so now, but maybe more back in the day, a lot of people would come out to LA to shoot the commercials and stuff like that, even though they were based in another city. And then you have kind of these second tier cities that have popped up, like Portland and Boulder, Austin, even like Minneapolis. And these cities have there have been these great creative communities that have popped up because of, one, either a really big agency, successful agency established there, and then people left that agency and sort of started their own shops. So certainly you see that in Portland with White & Kennedy, in Boulder with Crispin Porter and Bogusky. You see a lot of smaller shops, independent start from the alumni, and so you get this really nice, kind of almost like non-city collective. Or you have big clients, like that's for the case of Minneapolis. You have like really big clients who are based there, and so agencies will set up to be close to them. Same thing with Atlanta. Yeah, that's kind of the lay of the land. I think it's getting easier to not have to go to one of the major cities to work in advertising, which is nice because people can sort of craft the life that they want, but still be part of the industry.
That's great. Like you said, kind of opportunities in many more cities than just the two big ones. So, you're in New York, you're working there. Why was it important then for you to start We Are Next?
When I was director of strategy at Firstborn, I started doing a lot more guest lecturing as part of my role at universities, mostly about getting into advertising and marketing. And from that exposure to students, it just became very clear that there wasn't sufficient information flowing back out of the industry for this specific group, for those just starting out, outside of kind of one-on-one mentorship programs or guest lecturers going to universities, which certainly both of those things are totally necessary, important, and irreplaceable, but they don't necessarily scale. So I wanted to create a resource for this audience that was really open, accessible to everyone, no matter what school you went to or resources you did or didn't have access to. So it's really meant to supplement whatever you do or do not have in school. And And another reason that it's been important to start We Are Next has been the representation of voices from all corners of the industry. You know, diversity and inclusion is something we're still working on as an industry, and I wanted to make sure that people from all roles, all agencies, all backgrounds, all parts of the country had a place to kind of share their perspective and advice in a way that could benefit the most people. Because the thing about advertising and marketing that makes it so tricky is that it's a very fluid industry, in that, you know, we call things different things, and the title and the role and what you actually do is always changing, you know, and so it can be hard for someone to pinpoint, okay, that's exactly what I want to do at this agency, and so everyone brings their own perspective. Everyone has kind of their own path in, so to be able to collect those and kind of create a more holistic picture of what, you know, that experience could be for people starting out, that was really the goal for We Are Next.
That's fantastic. Did you also have any younger professionals reaching out to do informational interviews, or did any Bruins reach out to you?
For sure, for sure. I didn't mention it at the start, but I was really heavily involved in the Bruin advertising and marketing team. It was kind of the main part of my portfolio when I graduated, actually. They compete in the National Student Advertising Competition. And so I've stayed very close to the Bruin ad team. So definitely now, especially now that I've moved back, have come to, guest talks and stuff like that, and stayed really close to the team. And so through that, have definitely connected with more Bruins to do more one-on-one career stuff. It's definitely not what We Are Next is built on, but I'm always happy to help out fellow Bruins and people that I have, especially people that I have guest lectured in front of. Like, I'll get a lot of follow-up emails from them. And it's great because it's sort of a nice feedback system where I can take the questions that I commonly get after talks and turn them into content for We Are Next and help share that information to a larger audience that can definitely benefit from it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So in thinking about, getting into advertising or maybe any industry, I know that the self-reflection is a really crucial exploratory step in the job search process. So how do you recommend that people start this? Or maybe what are some of the important questions that you should be asking yourself?
Self-reflection is so key. But, sometimes the pressure to just get a job, any job, really makes us skip the step altogether. And sometimes it can be difficult, like you said, to know kind of where to start. So I like to boil it down to 5 questions that I tell people to ask themselves. I'll go through them briefly. If people want to take notes, now would be the time, because there are 5, but I'll make it brief. So question 1 is super easy, and it's, do you want to be geography-led or company-led? So what that means is, do you know where you want to live, or would you rather have the opportunities dictate where you want to end up? It sounds super basic, but it really quickly helps you draw a line in the sand and immediately narrows the focus of your search, which, again, it's like, if you can make it that much easier for yourself, you might as well do so. The second question is what size company that you want to work in. And for the advertising agency world, I break them up into small, medium, large. It might change depending on what industry you're trying to get into. And each size will have its own kind of traits. And of course, these are all going to be generalizations, but you can kind of expect certain things out of a small agency that you wouldn't out of a large agency. So for example, at a small company, you will probably be thrown right into the work and wear a lot of hats and maybe not get as much like hands-on training and kind of have to figure it out for yourself. But you'll also have greater access to the leadership team, and maybe there's less structure and it's a little more chaotic. Whereas at a large company, you'll have the structure, you'll have the hierarchy, more resources and perks maybe, but maybe easier to fall into the cracks or, something like that. So again, these are all generalizations and they aren't really meant to be pros or cons. It's really thinking about yourself and what environment you'll feel most comfortable in and where you'll be able to do your best work. The third question is the type of company you want to work at. And the type will vary based, again, on the industry that you're pursuing. But for advertising, there are kind of a number of types or factors that you can think of. So do I want to work for an independent agency, which is owned by the founders, or an agency that's owned by a holding company? So again, we're talking mergers and acquisitions that have been bought by a larger company and kind of is part of that network, that holding companies network. Do I want to focus more on what we call traditional media, so TV, print, radio, which less and less common, or be, you know, completely digital focused? Again, these lines are totally blurring now, so that might be less of a distinction now, but there are certain shops that you just do not do any traditional work. So all you're going to work on is digital. So that's a decision there. Or you could, you know, think about working at a specialized agency. So if you are really passionate about social media or experiential or events or multicultural marketing, there are agencies and companies that do just that. And so again, kind of just thinking through the different types based on, you know, whatever industry you're trying to get into can help give you some parameters in terms of your search. Question 4 are your must-haves, and this is very personal, and it involves a few questions. You know, thinking about, you know, how do I like to learn based on, you know, how you learned in school? How do you like to work with others, or how do you like to work in general? Are you more like a solo person, or, you know, a team contributor, or a little bit of both? You know, how much uncertainty are you comfortable with, or how much guidance do you feel like you need, or are you kind of like an autonomous person? Everyone's must-haves will differ. Some good examples are, you know, someone could say a must-have is a culture of collaboration between different teams. I want to make sure I'm working really closely with every team instead of kind of working just with my team. Or, you know, someone could say, I want work-life balance, even as, you know, a junior person just starting out. And we can talk about this a little later, but I think if that's something you believe in, you don't want to be starting out at a shop where their culture is just everyone stays until 9 p.m. and works weekends. It's just clearly not going to work out. You know, or, you know, your must-have could be a boss that you can personally relate to, not just on a professional level, but so there's all these little things, and again, it's really personal, and it's kind of like, what are those must-haves that you might not get 100% of them, but I think it's important to reflect on, again, to kind of, you're looking for criteria with which to judge the places you're looking at, so that you will end up at a place that supports you and that you know, can help you succeed in your career. Lastly, question 5, and it's the biggest one, is your why. So why do you want to go into advertising and marketing, or whatever industry that you're pursuing? I think this is important because I think, especially in advertising and marketing, we can go through, and I've certainly had this in my career, where you just start to question, like, you know, I think for advertising and marketing, it's natural because what we do is so tied to consumerism and buying things, and sometimes that can feel a little surface level when there's like a lot of other things going on in the world. And so I think it's important to identify what is driving you in your career. So it could be having an influence on culture. That's your why, because you are super passionate about that, and you know, that's something that you want in your career. Or my why is working with super talented and creative people around me all the time, you know. So I think finding your why, and then finding agencies that kind of can match your why or serve your why. So, you know, and there's a few ways to do that. Looking at the work that they do, the clients they work with, reading their mission statements, any like blog posts or press releases that they put out, you know, following people on social who work there. It kind of all helps paint a picture of whether or not that a company is going to support your why. So those are the 5 questions, and I went through them kind of quickly, and certainly there are more questions that you can ask yourself, but I think those are 5 like really solid ones that I think can just help put you at ease a little bit, because you have then, you know, if you go through all those questions and you write down all the answers, you have kind of a checklist then to start going out and assessing different companies, so that you're not just kind of scattershot putting your resume out there and, you know, potentially ending up at a place that's just not the right fit.
No, that is so, as you said, kind of structure to that process. So you mentioned culture, which I know is huge. What are some indicators of a company's culture that you can look for during the job search?
Mm-hmm. So I think often when we think about company culture, we think immediately about kind of an open air office space that allows dogs, or like beer on tap, or like a raging holiday party. These are certainly parts of a company's culture for sure. But there are definitely other important indicators that you can look for and actively ask about in your interview. So one thing that I think is super important is performance reviews. Like, how are performance reviews handled? having a clear sense of what's expected of you and how you're doing is so key in especially the first few years of your career. So asking how reviews happen, how often, who will be providing the feedback, what is the delivery format of the feedback. They're all really important indicators of culture and how the company approaches growth. Another one that I think is a good indicator are opportunities for continued learning. So I think we're most fulfilled when we're learning and growing, not just as employees, but as sort of full people. So I think, whether a company brings in speakers or sets aside budget for classes or, even just creates sort of an internal structure for mentorship, those are all signs of how the company invests in continued learning for its employees, and I think really speaks volumes about the culture. Another thing you can look for is what that company looks for in partners, whether that's clients or if you're on a marketing team with a brand, like in their agency partners, like what do they really look for? Because understanding the criteria with which a company vets its partners will determine the types of brands and teams that you work with and ultimately answer to. So I think that's also super important. And lastly, I'm going to credit my friend and fellow Bruin, Matthew Manos. He's the founder of Very Nice, and he's an adjunct faculty at the Art Center College of Design. And he posted recently a question that he tells his students to ask in interviews, and that it's, what do you usually do for lunch? And again, like that answer, whether it's, oh, we all eat lunch at our desk because there's just like so much to do, or we all go out together, or we all do our own thing, like each one of them says something about the company's culture and can be a good indicator of whether you feel like it's something that you want to join and buy into.
I love that question. It's very, very insightful. So how would you say that We Are Next can be useful for Bruins as they're looking to enter the marketing and advertising industries?
Yes, I'd love for Bruins to benefit from We Are Next. Nothing would make me happier. So we have a few things. We have a weekly email that goes out every Monday. It's 500 words or less on a specific topic. And it really focuses on the intangibles, like things you might not get out of school, and provides tools and resources as well as kind of curated job leads for internships and entry-level positions. And we also have frequent guest contributors from the industry, again, who share their perspective and advice, which is always really awesome. And at the end of the month, the emails from that month are added to our website. So we have this really nice growing collection of advice that you can search through. Everything's tagged. So you can sign up for both the weekly email and access the collection on the website, which is we-r-next.com. And lastly, we recently launched the We Are Next podcast, which I'm really, really excited about. And it really allows us to have longer conversations with people all over the industry about what they do, how they got there, and what they learned along the way. And you can search the podcast on iTunes or through the podcast section of the website.
That's great. I can't wait to check it out. So can you give us an example from your professional experience as to maybe the types of skills that are really well suited for marketing and advertising?
Mm-hmm. There are a couple that come to mind. First is being a strong communicator in every sense of the word. So verbally, both kind of internally with your team, because it really does take a village to get a piece of work sold through, produce, and kind of out in the world for people to see. So being able to be a good communicator with your internal team is super important to that process. Also, as a presenter, there's a lot of kind of public speaking and presentation involved, presented to clients mostly, or even just presenting in front of your company. So I think verbal communication, being a strong verbal communicator is certainly important, but also kind of a written communicator, I think, is also really needed in marketing and advertising. So how do you take sometimes really big, complex ideas and distill it down in a way that's really clear and succinct, but also impactful and compelling? And so whether you are a copywriter and you're actually creating ad copy, or in strategy, we write so much. We write creative briefs, we write presentations, white papers. Like there are so many ways that we use writing, and so I think being comfortable in writing is really key. I think this is more of a trait than a skill, perhaps, but I think people who are really voracious consumers of culture do really well in marketing and advertising. So staying tapped into what's going on in the world, kind of what are those socio and popular macro micro trends that are going on, because again, that really is the context with which we put our work out, and we feed off of what's going on, and we comment on, and we reflect in our work. And so it's really where we pull our, I don't know, like it's the fodder from which the creative ideas come from. So I think people who are naturally inclined to be interested in what's going on out there, and also they read a lot, they listen to podcasts, they watch the movies that are, it's just kind of they've got their finger on the pulse of things. And I think that's really important in the industry.
Most definitely. So in thinking about, some of the Bruins that are watching, are there any characteristics of a South Campus major that maybe lend themselves to the industry if someone graduated thinking they were going to go into science or something, and now they've decided they want to go into advertising?
Yes, I'm a strong believer that the best teams are made up of people with differing backgrounds who can really lend their unique perspective. And there are some specific roles that could be really well suited for our South Campus majors background. So a lot of agencies, and like this isn't meant to pigeonhole anyone into, because I'll talk about like kind of the traits also, but a lot of agencies have built out full development and tech teams to build and program websites, apps, VR experiences, or anything else that the team that's, they're at Firstborn especially, we had a whole team that did everything, front end, back end. And it was awesome. Also, data strategy is very in demand right now as clients sort of look to their agencies to prove the efficacy of the work now that a lot of it is digital and trackable and all that stuff. So data strategy is huge, and someone who is very analytical and numbers oriented could easily pursue data strategy. There are so many data strategists that do not start in the industry and come from other disciplines, but kind of make their way and learn kind of about the function of data strategy within an agency and are able to play that role beautifully. So there are definitely opportunities. And like I said, I do think that there are ways to take almost whatever experience you've had in the past and make it applicable to what you want to do in advertising and marketing.
That's great. It sounds like lots of opportunities for transferable skills. So in thinking about something we shared in your bio at the beginning, tell us a little bit about what it meant to you when you were selected for the Forbes 30 Under 30 list.
Yes, so so it was a shock, honestly, because you submit kind of in November-ish, you get nominated by your agency essentially, and you prepare kind of a whole submission about it. And then you kind of don't hear anything until they announce it to the world. And so you kind of like forget about it. And then, so they announced it right in the new year, like January 5th, whatever that was, 2015. And honestly, my first reaction when I looked at the list of people on the 30 Under 30 list for marketing and advertising, and I saw myself amongst all these founders and people just doing insane things, I honestly just felt like a huge imposter. Like I was like, there is some mistake, and I'm not trying to be humble or anything. I really like felt like, I don't know, like I'm not sure how I ended up on this list, and kind of immediately had that like icky like imposter syndrome feeling where I'm like, oh, everyone else is gonna think that like when they see this list, like, ugh. But I think what happened immediately afterwards, getting on the list, there's just such an outpouring of support and congratulations from people from like it was like, this is your life kind of thing, like that old show where like all these people came out of the woodwork, like past coworkers and people clients I'd worked with, all this stuff came out of the woodworks to congratulate me and all this stuff. And more than anything, I think 30 Under 30, it's not so much that I'm on the list per se. It's more that it was a great opportunity for me to pick my head up and realize how far I'd come in my career by this kind of arbitrary measure. Not to like make light of being on the list. Obviously, it's a huge honor, and but yeah, for me, it was a really nice kind of just moment to just like stop and reflect and be like, yeah, this is how, how far I've come. And it was really insane to again, like, I think the support of everyone really helped kind of make it real and not something that I was kind of just doing by myself with.
Well, kudos. Just know that the Bruin family is very proud of you. So before we go to the live chat, a couple of questions that we got when Bruins RSVP'd. One was submitted by Chloe, and she said, what's the best way to begin an advertising or marketing career when you don't have a background in it? So either an unrelated major or no internship experience that was relevant.
Yep. So this is a great question. So what you want to do, if you have no internship experience, I'm a firm believer that you can kind of make your own experience, meaning there are ways, like you don't have to go to a special grad school or anything like that. Certainly that's an option. There are advertising grad schools, portfolio schools, we call them, out there, which if you have the means, certainly go for it. It's a great way. If you have the time and the money, it's a great way to kind of just get that background, education, and the network and all that stuff. Outside of that, because not everyone can afford the time and the money, I think just working in advertising for a lot of roles, let's say for strategy or account management, a lot of it is showing that you can understand a problem and find a creative solution to it. And that doesn't necessarily require a class or internship. So for example, you could look at advertising that is out there in the world. There's plenty of it online. And you can either take a good tip or a good exercise that some people do is they take advertising that they really don't like, that they think is not good or, that didn't resonate with them. And they try to think about what do you think the business problem was behind it? So why did the client come to this agency with the request to create this piece of work? And then if you can reverse engineer like what that problem was, you can start to think about how you would approach that problem. And again, you don't necessarily have to do all the work. There's certain limitations to how much research you can do, but you can kind of be scrappy and say, okay, like how much can I find out about this certain audience that I think they were trying to target, whether that's, millennial females, like what kind of research is just out there online, and what do I know based on my own experience being a millennial female that can help me formulate an approach to this brief. You don't have to go in and create the ads. I mean, you could if you had some design skills or just wanted to mock something up or write up a script. You can kind of like make your own prompts, and that's really all, like in portfolio school, in kind of ad programs at universities, that's really all you're doing. I mean, certainly you have instruction along the way, but you're taking these problems and figuring out how you would approach it, and you can start to do that as a practice. I think that you can put together a kind of compelling like mini portfolio, and I think doing it shows an initiative. You took the initiative and you were proactive about it too, which in and of itself says a ton about you. So, and certainly there are all sorts of things on YouTube and lynda.com. Some people take classes at GA, at General Assembly. Again, this is, you have the funds and stuff like that. But I think there are ways to kind of show that you can think creatively and analytically about these type of problems and use creativity to solve it by yourself, like in your own home.
That's great. So you mentioned portfolio, and there's a great question in the live chat. Jessie asked, she said, when you switched from account management to strategy, did you need a portfolio to get a position in strategy?
So at the time, the way that I put my portfolio together was, so there are two things. One was I was working in a very small agency when I made the switch to strategy. And I was working, I mentioned, in account management. And there were certain things that I was doing in account management that are, that definitely overlap with things that you do in strategy. So, and some of the best account managers are very strategic, and some of the best strategists, have that kind of account management sensibility. And so I basically took a lot of the things that I was doing in account management and kind of, reposition them as as you know, how would those skills be beneficial as within a strategy team? Again, you're not like outright lying about things you can and cannot do, but I do think, as an account manager, you really need to know the competitive set of your client, and that's something we do in strategy as well. And so kind of pulling out those things, and so you can show the work that you've done in account management, but through a strategy lens. And the other thing I did, which I always recommend for people to do if they have the inkling, I guess, is I started a blog because I knew that I felt like I had the skills in me, but I just hadn't proved it yet that I could be a strategist. And so I started this thing called the 365 Project, which is a really old project of mine. And I basically committed to writing like 500 words or less every day for a year. And it was just, I would take things that I saw in the world, ads that I saw out there, just things that were going on in culture, and would write something about it. Again, taking what you see out there, kind of processing it, pulling out what you think is important, and just like being able to articulate that. I'd mentioned the writing thing. And it became a really great portfolio piece to show, like, if people ask, oh, can you show me a writing sample? I'm like, here's my perspective on all these things about the industry and stuff like that. And again, you don't have to do it for a year or anything like that, or even make it public. For me, it was nice kind of from an accountability perspective. Anyways, it was a nice way to supplement, I think, my portfolio, and did a lot for me making that transition from management to strategy. So I think, like, I didn't have as much of what we would think of as a portfolio when I made the switch. And I think today, if I was counseling someone, I would say to put together some sort of portfolio, but it doesn't have to, if you're in account management, it doesn't have to, come from scratch. You can kind of use what you have, but present it in a more strategic way.
I love that. So a great question we got here from Julie. She asked, can you describe what you look for in a mentor or woman-mentor, and do you consider them to be an essential piece of all of this?
Mentors are definitely essential, for sure. I mean, the 30 under 30 thing would never have happened without mentors and people who kind of see more in you than you see in yourself. And that's really what mentors are. And people talk about, I think it's Cindy Gallup talks about looking for champions and not mentors, or having a mentor who can be a champion, because it's a little more active. Like, it's people who will go out of their way to put your name in these rings, and, put you up for things that you didn't think you were able to do. I think it's so important. I mean, we don't all get to, hopefully your bosses can be a mentor. We don't always have that. I think something to go back to the question itself. So I look for someone who not only is going to mentor me, but feels like would get something, like, it's a reciprocal relationship, I guess is what I'm trying to articulate here. Like that the relationship goes both ways, and that I feel like I have something to share with them just as much as they have something to teach me, and we can kind of both benefit from that relationship. I think that's how mentorship relationships really sustain, because if you go to someone and you're like, oh, would you be my mentor? Sure, they might give you like a little bit of their time, but if it's all just like take, what is compelling that person to continue that relationship? You know what I mean? Like, out of, I guess, the goodness of their heart, of course. But I think it's important to find people who you can give something to, and also someone who maybe is a little bit different from you as well, who doesn't see things necessarily in the same way, because I think that definitely helps expand kind of the way that we see things, and that we're not kind of operating in a bubble. So I think those are a couple things that I would look for in a mentor.
That's great. So another question that we got in live chat was asking about some of the entry-level positions in marketing and advertising, and kind of what are some of the good roles or titles that you should look for when you're just getting into it. Yep.
So one thing I'll say is that it's less and less common these days for people to be able to get, I won't speak for marketing, but I'll talk about advertising specifically. It's less and less likely that you'll get an entry-level job right out of school, even if you've done internships in school. You could do a couple summer internships, but you're probably going to need to come on as an intern for a certain amount of time, 3 to 6 months, however that long that may be. And hopefully you're looking for an opportunity that can transition to full-time, and that's a really great way to get your foot in the door. And I think rather than seeing it as a hurdle, it's beneficial to both parties. Obviously, like, they want to see if you can function within the agency, that you're the right fit, and you're trying to see if they're matching all that criteria that you laid out as well. And so I think I always tell people, like, go in with the expectation that you probably are going to do an internship first, and which makes it really easy. But some other kind of entry-level titles you can look for. So anything with junior on it. So if you're a strategist, junior strategist, junior art director, junior copywriter. People also use like associate, so associate account manager, associate strategist. Yeah, I think those are the two major titles that people have. I mean, across like all the different departments, of course, but that's kind of the label that people will use. I'm trying to think if I think those are the two major ones.
Okay. And what would you say are some of the changes that you see maybe coming in the industry in the next 5 to 10 years?
The industry is always changing because of the way that we as consumers try to get away from advertising. It's sort of the sad truth of it, where brands are trying to get in front of us with their messages and their communication, and we are trying to live our own lives and avoid it. A lot of times, we come up with technology to skip ads, and we put up pop-up blockers and all that things. And so advertising has always had to evolve, whether it's like in new mediums, new formats, which is why you see content marketing and content in general, brands just putting out content that consumers think consumers will find interesting. That's why you see the rise of that. Influencer marketing, that kind of thing, kind of like inserting yourself more as things that people want to consume instead of kind of being very interruptive. And I think that will continue. It'll force brands to be more useful versus just saying things. And for me, what's exciting is thinking about, the digital revolution is kind of like long past in terms of advertising, but I think more and more we'll see brands understanding that you can take digital and use it not just as a communications platform, but you can insert it sort of at the core of your products and services and really change the experience that a consumer will have with a brand, whatever that may be. And I think that's really exciting because it expands greatly what we build that we call advertising, or what clients are coming to advertising agencies for. So I think that's another thing. And lastly, everyone talks about automation and what that's going to do, and kind of, are we still going to be employed, or is the industry still going to exist? And in 5 to 10 years, certainly it'll still exist. And like I said, it's always had to keep evolving. And so I think it will. And yeah, I don't know. Automation's it's an interesting puzzle, and I think it affects more than we think. We think about it when we think about media, but I've talked to people who have showed me apps that build websites for you. Like literally, you just click and then it's just done. And so like developer, I don't know. It's pretty crazy, but yeah, those are kind of the main. When I think about how the industry is going to continue to change, those are things that come up.
Do you think in relation to that either augmented reality or virtual reality is going to play a role in marketing and advertising in the future?
Yeah, we've already seen a lot of brands start to do things in VR. I think the challenge with virtual reality is, well, it's not a challenge, but we'll see. Virtual reality is still not necessarily a consumer product. So it's sort of the distribution method for VR is still very limited. If you're at an event or something like that, we don't have VR machines in our homes yet. And I think brands are still trying to figure out how to use VR, because the example I love to give is, a car brand can come to an agency and say, we want to, do a VR-based test drive. So for people who don't go to the dealership, they can be in their homes and experience what it's like to drive in this car. And that's great. You can make one that looks super accurate and flashy and all that stuff, but it will never replace the act of actually sitting in a car and test driving it to decide whether you want to buy it. So I think figuring out reasons to use virtual reality in a smart way is still something that we'll see more and more of. And I think we'll get there, and I think there'll be some really amazing executions that we'll see as it becomes more of a consumer product. Augmented reality is huge, and I think it's like about to take off, and really you can credit, you know, Snapchat and Instagram now for getting us really comfortable with augmented reality. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how brands kind of run with it, because they definitely will.
Definitely. So as we start to wrap up, what would you say are the top things that you want Bruins to take away from tonight's discussion?
The top things would be, one, figuring out the right fit is really just about things that you know about yourself. And it really takes some self-reflection. And self-reflection isn't just like I'm sitting in a room and thinking about things. I think as you go about your life, starting to note the things that you enjoy doing, the times where you know, kind of get in that flow state or feel super satisfied. Like even just those little things that we know about ourselves can go a long way in helping us guide our career path. And so I think the self-reflection part is huge. It doesn't have to feel like this huge, scary thing. It's really just asking questions about ourselves and then mapping that to the places and industries that we want to work. And yeah, the other thing that I would say is we didn't really talk about it as much, but the whole idea of being able to work in advertising and marketing, having come from another industry. Again, like I could go on and on, but there's so much benefit to having someone come in with a different perspective, and it's really just about finding the parallels between what you've done. And there are certain things that are like so universal, right? Like cross-team collaboration or presentation skills. Like those are things you could have done, you know, in a completely different industry that are necessary in advertising and marketing. And so it's a lot of it's finding those things and packaging them up as valuable for this industry. So I would highly encourage anyone who's thinking about making a switch, or you're in a major that doesn't quite map to it, it's totally okay. There are more and more resources out there to kind of help you figure that out, including We Are Next. Yeah, those would be the two things I think that I want people to take away.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Natalie, so much for your valuable insight and your just advice about both finding the right fit, regardless of the industry, as well as those real, niche comments about advertising and marketing. To everyone who's watching, thank you so much for joining us and participating in tonight's discussion. If you missed a portion of tonight's event or you want to share it with others, you can find the recording on our UCLA Alumni YouTube channel. Also, we want your thoughts about upcoming topics. Through your suggestions, we can help to tailor the programming to what you're interested in. So send us an email at careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu. Thank you again to Natalie and everyone for being a part of tonight's discussion. And once again, thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like tonight possible. We'll see you again in October for our next episode in the Bruin Career Insights series. Have a good evening and go Bruins!